I'm delighted to be joining you tonight, and while it's a tremendous honor to represent the people of the city of Los Angeles, my favorite part of the job is representing the animals of the city of Los Angeles. Which is why I first want to applaud all of you. I mean, this is a group that fights in the trenches, from lobbying elected officials to working with animal rescue to doing much more aggressive stuff, sometimes landing in jail as a result. I haven't done that yet, but it's not impossible. I've been a protest worker for that. Which is why this animal rights conference is so important. So we look at what we can do to do more for animals, how we can be more effective, and it's all very exciting. Now, humane issues have been near and dear to my heart, particularly through my whole political career, which has been around 30 years in politics. And I like to think it's been the answer to the question, what if an animal activist got elected and could do whatever he wanted? So I've been trying to do that for 30 years. I started in West Hollywood. I helped found the city in 1984, and I was one of the first staff people and then a council member for a number of years. And I had the city start taking positions on animal cruelty issues, like state legislation to ban the Dre's eye irritancy test and steel leg bolt traps, and a lot of other good things that were going on. We created an animal issues task force to deal with all the animal issues in the city of West Hollywood, and we declared ourselves the first animal cruelty-free city, I believe, in the entire world. I even wrote an ordinance that prevented landlords from evicting senior citizens or disabled or people with AIDS that had small animals in their homes, even if their leases didn't allow it. And it's actually originally for one homebound senior citizen and her 2 cats. We called it the Molly Protection Act because it was to save Molly, the cat that got spotted in the window by the landlord. And sadly, many years later, Molly has just died. But in her memory, I'm going to introduce the same legislation in the city of Los Angeles now. With great council members like Doggy, Jeff Prine, John Duran, to do any number of landmark ordinances which other cities have followed and which I've tried to follow in some cases. I wound up getting elected to the state legislature, and there I was kind of like a kid in a candy store. I was like, okay, every great idea that I've ever thought needed to be addressed, I was going to introduce it. And some of these things you would think are pretty intuitive, but unfortunately, most things failed because I found in the state legislature, although it's a little better now, there's more of a movement on animal issues now. Special interests have a lot of sway, especially if they're the kind that give money to legislators. So, amazingly, I offered a ban on shooting wolves from helicopters. Now, this didn't pass, but you would think it's intuitive because number one, it hurts the wolves, and sometimes they're just hit and not killed, so they're injured. People trying to shoot wolves from helicopters, not such a safe thing, so some of them have been injured. And ironically, when the wolves are killed, the reaction is they wind up actually with more wolves because they change their breeding practices. So it's not only unsafe, but to reduce the number of wolves, you actually are increasing the number of wolves, and yet it failed. So we've had some tough legislation. I did a bill, which I thought, again, a huge percentage of the population supports, to ban having dogs chase bears up trees and shooting them at point-blank range with rifles. Now, that one not only didn't pass, it missed by so much. I have to tell you what happened. We had a hearing. We showed up in this hearing room that seats 600, but usually has 20 people in it. There were 600 burly hunters in fatigues Some of them probably armed. And when my legislation came up, they all stood up and made a menacing gesture like that and stood that way the entire time. 600 people taking every seat. I had 4 co-authors of 19 members of this committee. I only got 3 votes. Even some of my co-authors were intimidated by this group. I talked to one, he said, I never want to see these people in my office again. I never want to see them in the Capitol again. Now, amazingly, 7 years later, I think you're going to hear from Ted Lieu at some point tonight, Senator Ted Lieu. He brought back this legislation with a few tips from us, like have a bunch of your people show up earlier than theirs, so you actually get some seats and it's not all just these intimidating guys. He actually got this legislation through a couple of years ago, so I don't think he's here yet, but let's give him a big hand anyway. I don't know how it was possible, but he did it. Even the veterinarians have a lot of clout in Sacramento, so I did a bill to ban the declawing of all cats. Not just house cats, but lions and tigers for whom it's much more painful, and I've actually seen some where you can see as they take every step they think about it because they know how painful it's going to be. That legislation was partly defeated. The part about house cats was defeated because a lot of vets routinely will do this surgery even when it's completely unnecessary and they make a lot of money. There aren't many that make money declawing lions and tigers, so we were actually able to pass that, and so we banned at the state level all declawing of exotic cats, which, if you know much about this surgery, is essentially doing this to a cat, cutting off the tip of their fingers. So the same group knew that I was going to get elected to the LA City Council. And they'd seen West Hollywood pass a ban on cat declawing, and I think they were afraid that I would do the same. So they passed legislation in Sacramento, and to hide the fact that they were trying to avoid a ban on declawing, they got every medical specialty in the state to support a bill that said cities cannot regulate any kind of medical activity whatsoever under any circumstances. So you brought a coalition of every medical specialty, from chiropractors to physicians to 50 others. And as you can imagine, it passed virtually unanimously at the state level. So I get elected to the city council, July of 2009. This legislation is passed, and I realized they could have made it an urgency bill because they had a virtually unanimous support, and I think you need 2/3 to do it, but they hadn't. So what they had done is give a deadline to every city that wanted to ban cat declawing. Now, Los Angeles was nearly bankrupt. We were $700 million short. We were trying desperately to figure out how to handle our finances. But I was able to say, look, I have a deadline in December. You have to pass my cat declawing bill now. So an item that would not have been taken seriously probably for years was given a deadline by the veterinarians and others. And so not only Los Angeles, but 10 other cities passed bans on cat declawing because our opponents had inadvertently given us a deadline. And now we're a good example to all the other 49 states, but eventually we'll need to pass state legislation to do it in the rest of California. Now, I'm now on the LA City Council, as I said, and I have found it's a lot easier at the city level to get legislation passed. So we've banned declawing in the city of Los Angeles. We've banned puppy mills in the city of Los Angeles. And we banned selling commercially bred cats, dogs, and rabbits in any pet store in the city of Los Angeles. So the pet stores that want to sell animals, they can sell animals that come from rescues or from our shelters. So instead of being part of the overpopulation problem, now they're part of the overpopulation solution. So a good step in that direction. We're trying to do a number of other things. We passed a ban on having bull hooks used on elephants in the circus. That will go into effect in a couple of years. It may wind up being sooner now that we've seen how elephants are treated currently at the current Ringling Brothers show. It was very interesting when that item was heard originally, because representatives of Ringling Brothers were there saying, "This is just the PETA agenda, and you're just listening to them." And I said, "No, this is my legislation. They're here helping me." So I think they realized they didn't have too much hope. And although it was difficult, and originally I wasn't sure it was going to pass, it wound up passing unanimously at the City Council. And before I get the hook, I will say I also at some point hope to revisit dealing with elephants in the LA Zoo. We have one council member who's a very good friend of mine who's been the leader in support of that, who is almost term limited out, so we'll take another shot at that, especially with Billy the elephant, who has exhibited a lot of trauma as a result of his years in the zoo. So we'll be working on that. We have legislation to try and deal with the overpopulation issue in the shelters by allowing people to have more animals in their homes. Currently there's a 3 limit. We're starting, obviously, as someone who agrees with that in back. We're starting with cats because they don't bark, so it's an easier sell. But we hope to do that and increase adoptions, obviously, so people that would want to adopt the most easily are people that already have animals, so it makes sense. We're also doing some things to protect wildlife, to guarantee that we have wildlife corridors, and to pass some planning regulations to continue that. And one significant thing that isn't on many people's radar is we're trying to ban rodenticides in the hillsides, because we're finding that not only do we kill the rats, but then owls and bobcats and mountain lions and others wind up eating these rats, and a very high percentage of our wildlife is either dying off or very ill. And you might remember seeing pictures of the mountain lion known as P22 in the LA Times looking very healthy. Well, there was another article that showed him very unhealthy with mange from having eaten poisoned rats. So he is recovering pretty well, so I think that'll all be fine, but it was certainly an example of why that issue is important. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for all that you do. I hope I've shed a little light on how you can get some things done through the legislative process. And I do want to thank the organization that put this together and to provide a certificate from the City of Los Angeles to the Animal Rights 2014 National Conference. An organization that does all this crazy stuff has an official commendation from the City of Los Angeles. So.
Is Alex Urshap able to come up for a picture as well?
And if you allow me to read this brief commendation, it says, City of Los Angeles hereby salutes and celebrates you for the compassionate work you do to ensure the welfare and fair treatment of innocent animals. As the world's largest and longest-running annual gathering of animal rights activists, the Animal Rights National Conference is exemplary in its commitment to progress in animal rights reform. By informing our communities about animal abuses and exploitation, you've inspired awareness and concern about the rights of animals everywhere. The work you do to bring animals everywhere a voice has both saved and improved the lives of countless animals. So thank you for everything you do.